Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on big oil and their energy strategies. Specifically, what's going on with European giants like BP and Shell. These companies were all about going green just a few years ago, and now it seems like they're maybe pumping the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, it's quite a shift from those bold promises just a few years ago.
We've got some articles from Business Times, Energy Voice, and Sustainability Magazine, plus and a policy document straight from Shell to try and unpack all this.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in. Business Times is reporting that both BP and Shell are kind of pulling back on some of their green energy investments, and instead they're shifting their focus back to oil and gas. What's going on?
Yeah, well, and it's not small changes either. BP is selling off wind and solar assets, and they've hit pause on 18 hydrogen projects.
18.
18, including a flagship project in the UK that was supposed to produce blue hydrogen at scale.
Wow.
They've also drastically downsized their hydrogen team.
So that's a pretty big statement. What about Shell? Are they making similar moves?
Yeah, they are. Shell is reducing its investments in floating offshore wind, hydrogen projects, even exiting some European markets entirely.
Wow.
They're selling refineries and have lowered their 2030 carbon reduction targets.
It seems like a pretty big shift, especially considering how much they were talking up green energy just a little while ago.
Yeah.
What's driving this? What's going on?
Well, you've got, there's a lot of factors at play. Rising costs and supply chain issues,
Sure.
those are eating into the profitability of renewable projects, especially those big offshore wind farms. And then there's the ongoing energy crisis, triggered in part by the conflict in Ukraine, which is really, shaking things up.
Yeah.
So
I can see how that would make investors nervous. I mean, oil and gas prices are through the roof, so maybe those renewable investments aren't looking as attractive.
exactly. Investors are looking for returns, and they're starting to question whether these companies can deliver on their green promises while still, keeping the lights on and keeping those profits rolling in.
So it's like they're caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to appease investors while also, sticking to these commitments they've made to a low-carbon future.
It's a tricky balancing act, for sure. They're facing pressure from shareholders, governments, and activists, all while navigating, a really volatile energy market.
Speaking of balancing acts, Energy Voice highlighted an interesting development, the rise of biofuels. Both the CEOs of BP and Shell have said they are prioritizing biofuels as a key investment area.
This is interesting because it provides a way for these companies to address, kind of those immediate demands of the energy market, while still making at least some steps towards decarbonization.
Okay, so how are they approaching biofuels? Are they all in, or is it more of a, tiptoe in the water kind of thing?
They seem to be making significant moves. Shell, for example, acquired Nature Energy, which makes them the largest producer of renewable natural gas in Europe. And this gives them a strong foothold in a rapidly growing market.
Renewable natural gas. So that's RNG. It sounds promising, but isn't that ultimately derived from, natural gas?
Yeah.
How is that renewable?
Yeah, it's a good question. RNG is produced from organic waste, like what you'd find in landfills or agricultural processes.
Okay.
So while it's technically a byproduct of decomposition, it's considered renewable because the source material is constantly being replenished.
Okay.
Plus, capturing this methane and using it as fuel prevents it from escaping into the atmosphere, which is a big win for the climate.
Right. It's like turning trash into treasure.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least energy.
Yeah.
What's BP doing on the biofuel front? Are they following a similar path?
They're taking a slightly different approach.
Okay.
BP is investing heavily in landfill gas capture in North America and biofuel production in Brazil, which allows them to tap into existing infrastructure and leverage Brazil's expertise in biofuel production from sugarcane.
So both companies are betting on biofuels, but approaching it from slightly different angles.
Yeah.
Shell is focused on RNG and building a strong European presence, while BP is going for a more global approach, tapping into different feedstocks and different markets.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that, unlike fossil fuels, biofuel production doesn't face that inherent decline. You can always plant more sugarcane or collect more waste.
So it's potentially more stable and secure source of energy, especially given how volatile those global fossil fuel markets are.
Precisely. And this is a point that both companies are emphasizing as they make the case for biofuels.
Okay, so we've got big oil pulling back a bit on some of their green initiatives, doubling down on biofuels. But what about the bigger picture? Where does Europe fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Sustainability magazine reported on a group of 74 organizations, including Shell and BP,
Okay.
that sent a letter to the European Commission. And in this letter, they expressed concerns about the pace of Europe's energy transition.
Wait, so even the oil companies are worried that Europe's green transition is stalling.
Mhm.
What's going on?
They're basically saying that the high cost of clean technologies is making it hard for European companies to compete globally. They're concerned about a potential drying up of investments and even an industrial exodus from Europe.
That's a pretty serious, pretty dire prediction.
Yeah.
I mean, Europe has been a leader in pushing for a green transition. Are they saying those efforts are backfiring?
They're not saying it's backfiring, but they are highlighting the challenges of, trying to maintain that economic competitiveness while also trying to rapidly decarbonize.
So what's the solution? Are they saying, hey, let's just slow down and not be so ambitious?
Not quite. They're actually pushing for a concept called demand creation.
Okay.
It's about using government mandates and incentives to create markets for cleaner industrial products.
So kind of like giving those clean technologies a boost,
Mm.
making them more commercially viable by ensuring that there's a demand for what they produce.
Exactly. A great example of this is E10 gasoline.
Right.
Europe mandated that gasoline must contain 10% biofuels, which created this huge demand for biofuels and spurred investment in biofuel production.
So it's about using market forces to drive the development and adoption of these new technologies, making them not just good for the planet, but good for business too. That's a clever approach.
And if it's good for business, it ultimately benefits you as a consumer as well, leading to more affordable, more accessible clean energy options.
This is all really fascinating. We've seen how these big oil companies are adapting to this complex energy landscape,
Yeah.
trying to balance climate goals with the need to stay profitable.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And we've only just scratched the surface. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into Shell's own policy document, which outlines their vision for European competitiveness in the energy transition. It provides a really interesting look at how they're trying to reconcile their commitment to net zero emissions with the realities of the market today.
So we talked about big oil pulling back on some green initiatives and then, kind of doubling down on biofuels. But now I want to dig into the Shell policy document a little bit. They've been very vocal about their vision for Europe's energy transition, and I'd love to get your take on how they see this all playing out.
Yeah, this document is, I think, really interesting because it lays out Shell's strategy for remaining competitive in Europe while still aiming for net zero by 2050.
Hmm.
They're very clearly trying to walk this tightrope between, their commitment to sustainability, but also the realities of today's energy market.
So what are the key takeaways here? What's their grand plan?
Well, they're focusing on three main areas: deep electrification, ensuring energy security, and strengthening the business case for renewable and low-carbon solutions in hard-to-decarbonize sectors.
Okay, so deep electrification, does that mean electrifying everything? Across all sectors. Sounds ambitious.
It is, and they're really emphasizing the need for a massive expansion of renewable energy infrastructure to be able to support that level of electrification.
Makes sense. But what about energy security? I mean, that feels particularly relevant given, the current geopolitical climate and Europe's reliance on, well, let's just say unreliable energy partners.
Absolutely, and this is where their emphasis on natural gas comes in. They see natural gas as that, crucial bridge fuel to a fully renewable future.
Okay, but I'm still a bit stuck on the natural gas thing. I mean, it is still a fossil fuel, right?
Yeah.
How does that work with, their commitment to reducing emissions?
Yeah, it's a valid question, and it's one that has sparked a lot of debate. Shell argues that natural gas is a cleaner burning alternative to coal, particularly for power generation. So while it's not a perfect solution, they believe it's necessary, as a step in the transition.
So it's about finding that balance, reducing reliance on, the dirtiest fossil fuels while still ensuring, a stable and secure energy supply.
Exactly. And they're not just talking about natural gas, they're also investing in carbon capture and storage, CCS technologies, to try to mitigate the emissions from natural gas production and use.
Right. So capturing those emissions and storing them underground, preventing them from going into the atmosphere. It's cool tech, but how far along is it? Can it really be done at the scale we need?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question. And the answer is, it's still evolving. CCS is complex, it's expensive, and there are still a lot of unknowns. But Shell, along with other major energy companies, is investing heavily in its development, believing that it will be a crucial piece of the puzzle to getting to net zero.
Okay, so we've got natural gas, we've got CCS. But what about those other potential game changers like hydrogen and biofuels? Are they part of the plan as well?
Absolutely. In fact, they see hydrogen as a key component of their long-term strategy, especially for those hard-to-abate sectors.
So you're talking about industries like heavy manufacturing, shipping, aviation, right? The stuff that's really hard to just switch over to electricity.
Exactly. Hydrogen has that potential to be a clean fuel source for these sectors,
Yeah.
but it also comes with its own challenges.
Like, I mean, hydrogen production can be quite energy intensive, depending on the method, right?
Right. You've got green hydrogen, produced using renewable energy, and blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas, but paired with CCS to capture those emissions. Shell is investing in both.
So even within hydrogen, there are shades of green.
Yeah.
And it sounds like we don't really know which one is going to be the most scalable and cost effective.
Yeah, it's a bit of a race right now between
Oh.
those different technologies.
So they're hedging their bets, investing in a range of technologies from natural gas and CCS to hydrogen and biofuels. It's quite a portfolio.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into another really crucial point in their policy document, the need for a level playing field.
Remind me what that means in this context. Is that about like fair competition between these different energy sources?
Exactly. They're arguing that governments need to create policies that don't disadvantage cleaner, but currently more expensive technologies. They're pushing for things like the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, which I think you might remember from some of our previous discussions.
Right, the CBAM, that's the one designed to stop companies from just shifting their polluting activities to countries with weaker regulations.
Right.
Essentially putting a price on carbon for imported goods, making it more expensive to pollute.
Exactly. And Shell sees this as a way to level that playing field, to make cleaner technologies more competitive on that global market.
So it's about creating the right economic incentives to drive adoption of these technologies, not just hoping that everyone's going to do the right thing out of the goodness of their hearts.
Right. They're arguing that economic viability is absolutely crucial
Yeah.
for driving that large-scale change. And that's why they're also pushing for more streamlined regulations and permitting processes
Yeah.
to speed up the development of these low-carbon projects.
Makes sense. The faster we can get these projects off the ground, the faster we can scale them up and make them more affordable.
Exactly. And it's not just about speed. It's about sending that clear signal to investors
Right.
that Europe is serious about supporting the energy transition.
So it's about creating a policy environment that encourages innovation, attracts investment, and ultimately accelerates that shift to a cleaner energy future.
Precisely. And Shell is very much positioning itself as a key player in that transition, advocating for policies that support both their own business interests, but also their stated climate goals.
It's a really fascinating and complex strategy, and I can see how they're trying to balance those competing priorities: profitability, sustainability, and energy security for Europe.
It's a delicate balancing act,
Yeah.
and, not without its critics. Some argue that Shell's continued reliance on natural gas is just delaying the inevitable transition to renewables, while others question their commitment to truly achieving net zero.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and it raises some really important questions about the role of these big companies in shaping the future of energy.
And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll examine the broader implications of these strategies, consider the potential impact on the fight against climate change, and leave you with some things to think about as you continue to explore this topic.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive, exploring big oil's energy strategies and Shell's vision for that competitive and sustainable energy transition in Europe.
Yeah. And how they're trying to navigate this really complex and rapidly changing landscape, balancing demands from investors, governments, and a growing global awareness of climate change.
Yeah. It's clear that they're making strategic choices, some of which might seem a little counterintuitive at first, like scaling back on some of those green initiatives while really doubling down on others.
Right.
And it raises the question what does all this mean for the fight against climate change? Are these companies truly committed to a low carbon future? Or are they just kind of greenwashing while continuing with business as usual?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? On one hand, they are investing in things like biofuels and hydrogen and CCS, which seem like steps in the right direction.
Right.
But at the same time, they're still very much reliant on fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, which they see as that bridge fuel.
And that's where the debate gets really heated.
Yeah.
Because some people argue that natural gas is just delaying that inevitable transition to renewables, while others say no, it's a necessary stepping stone.
Yeah, it's complex. with no easy answers. And it highlights those challenges of trying to balance those short-term energy needs with those longer-term climate goals.
Where do you kind of come down on this? Do you think these companies are doing enough? Or are they moving too slowly?
It's really hard to say definitively. I mean, they are making those investments in cleaner technologies, and they are advocating for those policies that support the energy transition. But, it's also pretty clear that they're prioritizing profits and trying to hold on to their place in this changing energy market.
So it's like they're trying to, I don't know, have their cake and eat it too, trying to reduce emissions while still, profiting from fossil fuels.
In a way, yeah. And it raises questions about, that true commitment to net zero. Some people are saying, their actions don't really match their words, and they're not moving fast enough to avoid, the worst effects of climate change.
That's a valid concern and one that, I think as listeners you should be aware of. These companies have a lot of power and their choices have a huge impact.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to hold them accountable, to really look at what they're doing and push for those policies that, that are really going to get us to a sustainable energy future.
And it's not just about these big companies, it's about all of us making more sustainable choices.
Exactly. It's not someone else's problem to solve. Every action, even the small ones, matter.
Whether it's, reducing our energy consumption at home, supporting renewables, or advocating for better policies.
Yeah, every choice has an impact. And if we all do our part, we can really drive change.
So I think even though this deep dive has shown us some of the, the difficult parts and the contradictions of this energy transition, it's also shown us that there's potential for progress.
Yeah, we've seen these companies adapting and, new technologies are emerging. And the whole conversation around climate is changing.
And that's really what it all comes down to. It's all of us working together, demanding action from our leaders and, holding each other accountable and making those smart choices,
Yeah.
to get to a more sustainable future.
I think this deep dive has given you a lot to think about, a deeper understanding of, the challenges and the opportunities. And with this knowledge, you can join the conversation and, make those informed decisions that align with your values.
We've explored, big oil, we've explored the European energy transition, and we've grappled with, with that big question, what does all of this mean for the planet?
It's your turn to keep going. Stay informed, use your voice, advocate for the future you want.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep pushing for a brighter future.